Welcome to the latest episode of WSP's Anticipate Podcast, where we invite experts and thought leaders to share their unique perspectives on future trends, hot topics, and anticipate solutions to complex problems. I'm your host, Dave Kimmerly, Operations Director for Property and Buildings at WSP in the Middle East. When we think about what the future holds for the engineering and construction industry, it's common for discussions to focus on the digital transformation and digitization of everyday processes in design. However, it's not just the technology that will shape the future of our industry, it's also the people. In this episode, we discuss innovating for the value of clients and stakeholders, and the importance of challenging the attitudes and behaviors we have towards implementing technological processes in an industry that will one day be underpinned by digital. It's an honor to be joined today by Don Ward, Chief Executive Officer of the International Council for Research and Innovation in Building and Construction. Don, welcome, and thank you again for joining this discussion.
Morning, Don.
Morning, Dave. How are you?
I'm good. Very good. We chatted briefly, and I really like the thought-provoking kind of innovation or trust. We could probably have an entire podcast simply on our perception of what trust is and how trust is very important in any industry, but even more so when we're doing very challenging things within the construction industries. I have a massive admiration for automotive, aerospace, those types of engineering practices, and the level of complexity and level of efficiency that they establish within their fields, but also the level of innovation that we've seen over the last 50, 70 years in those industries is astounding, and continuing still with some of the big players in those, your Boeings and Airbus and Lockheed Martin, and then moving into some of the new players like SpaceX and Tesla. The level of innovation that we're seeing, I think, outpaces the level of innovation we're seeing in the construction industry, especially the property and buildings industry. So I thought I'd start there with maybe a bit of a discussion around research and development in those and how it's different, or how there are some parallels that we can lean on.
Yes, and I think the key to that discussion is that there are definitely both. There are differences and there are similarities, and there are things we can learn from. I mean, I was first involved in some work comparing aerospace with construction over 20 years ago, which was an academic research led by Reading University in the UK, as it happens. They're both essentially project industries at the heart, because when you start the setup of a production line for a new aircraft, it's a 5 to 7 year project, just like a major building project. They haven't done it before, although the parties can draw on their past experience and so on. And it takes them the same amount of time as construction does to get that production line right. Of course, the benefit they have is then they get to repeat the process and to produce similar products time after time. And where we don't seem to learn from this is in two respects, really. One is our obsession with, you could call it innovation if you like, but one-off design of a new facility instead of reusing stuff we've done before, whether that's componentry or the equivalent of a chassis, the hub of a building, or whether it's the entire the entire facility. The other aspect they get right is they have a long-term integrated supply chain. Whoever they start to work with, they continue to work with those folks for years and for decades. And so as a team, they learn from end to end, from design to manufacture to maintenance. They are working together day in, day out. The opportunity is there for measurement and continuous improvement, and for feedback into the next project, or in their case, the next production line. And the same parties, the same companies will constantly work together, always assuming that, their performance is good enough and the profitability on both sides is good enough. And all those sorts of basic commercial drivers, if you like, of course, have to be right. But we seem to be obsessed instead with tendering or competing for every single part of the project team, from design and design consultants to project management contractors, suppliers, materials. Everything is competed every time. And that's not literally true. Of course, there are examples of longer term supply frameworks and so on. I don't know if you'd agree, but far too often, it seems to me, we're bespoking a product, and we're bespoking the project team that we're asking to deliver it.
No, I would definitely agree. And I think, I'm a big fan of competition. I think competition is great in our industry, that it does create those opportunities for innovation. It does create opportunities for people that may not have the expertise or the experience delivering something to really stand out and potentially get an opportunity to take a bite of something a lot bigger. But it can be a significant hurdle, and it just adds a bit more conversation around the process that you're going through, which is already extremely complicated. To quote a story that our CEO, Greg, had shared, comparing Toyota. Toyota, is on their 10th or 12th generation of one of their cars, which they've designed over the last 50, 60 years. And the next generation, they take another 7 years to develop. They have that supply chain. They're developing a iteration of a vehicle with an expectation that it's only going to last 10 years on the road, say, versus the industry that we're working in. We're designing a building, a 100-story building, establishing the supply chain, getting it built and operating with an expectation that's going to last 100 plus years. And we're doing that all within a 5 to 7 year time frame. And like you said, it's done. The book is closed on that design, and it doesn't get repeated other than in the knowledge that we take to the next project. Is it a pride thing? Is it an ownership of a design? Why couldn't we have another Burj Khalifa in Hong Kong? Why couldn't we have one in Chicago? Certainly, there's a lot of efficiencies that can be, and I'm using that as a very extreme example, but we see a lot of extremely high efficient LEED buildings that have extreme sustainability returns into those projects. There should be a capability to, sell that design and let somebody else copy it. Obviously, they can add their flair, they can put their own color on it and change the way it looks. But a lot of the heavy work that was done into that initial project, I think that's an extreme value proposition for the market. But it's not a new idea. I think people have been toying around with that idea for 50 years. But it's never caught on. Contractors, I think, moving towards modular design are pushing that in some areas. Asia is very keen on that type of design, where we will see that, with the modular construction. But I still don't know if we're going to be, seeing these copy and paste necessarily in the industry, which is great from perspective of being part of a company that is designing these. But again, it's just another step that we may be taking in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be misunderstood about the value of competition. Absolutely, competition is the bedrock of how our business works and how our markets operate. But we're talking about it needs to be competition on the right basis. Perhaps because it's so difficult to evaluate quality or the performance of finished facilities when they're still on the design board, we default to a selection or a competition based on price and based on tender price, not even on outturn price or the evidence of the ability to deliver, predictably to what that tender price is, let alone on, what the whole life operating costs are going to be of the facility or the total through life cost of the facility, let alone, what revenue the facility might generate. So, I mean, as a sort of diversion, for 20 years, been very, very taken with some of the evidence and the whole research field around productivity in buildings and the productivity, for example, of office workers. And do we know how to design and build and operate an office building which will help the workers in it be more productive and therefore make more money for their employer, for the tenant of the building? Or do we know how to build better schools that will help teachers and kids perform better and therefore improve education levels, or better hospitals that will achieve better healthcare outcomes? And the answer is we do, but we don't capture and use that knowledge. So it's in pockets. So the designers have some of that knowledge, the facilities managers have some of that knowledge, but they don't necessarily capture that and reuse it and deploy it each time. And the client still buys the hospital on a lowest price instead of thinking about what is the design, construction, and operation package that will deliver me the best healthcare outcomes. Because that, after all, is what the client is trying to buy in that example. They're not trying to buy a building. They want to buy better healthcare outcomes for sick people. And we, as an industry, I don't think are very good at communicating that, first of all. I think that's been part because we're not very good at measuring that. I'm not sure that we can evidence that the buildings that a designer worked on are better in terms of productivity than other people's. I'm not sure contractors even know how their finished facilities perform. And facilities managers don't have a role in design, so they can't. So they do know how facilities perform, but they don't get to help the designers and the contractors with the design phase. So it's sort of busted from that point of view. And you can understand, therefore, why people keep doing the same old, don't really focus on value and default to a lowest price because, well, everybody's the same, aren't they? We might as well just buy as if it was a commodity. There's designers are 10 a penny. There's loads of contractors and plenty of them who can evidence that they've built this type of building before. So if we can't differentiate and the industry doesn't make it easy for me to differentiate as a client, well, I might as well just buy the cheapest then.
No, I agree. I think one thing that the industry is moving towards, it's that the digitization of our industry, and we are, as an industry, I would say behind, aerospace, the automotive, and other fields. But we're going to be quick on the uptake in terms of digitization. We're already moving into the 3D realm with tools like Revit. We're using building information modeling, with BIM for a lot of our work and moving that forward again, which is something that kind of came out of aerospace and aviation. The BIM process. And I think you mentioned last time we talked that it was it Airbus that had the first full model of an airplane.
I believe so. Yeah, and it wasn't that long ago. Within the last decade, that sort of period. Partly because the technology wasn't able to do it, and partly because there was a sense that it didn't actually need to digitize the whole thing. Parts of it, the important critical parts, yes, but not necessarily everything.
And there's still a case for that now. Do we need to digitize everything for the design? I think there's a great argument to be had, and it'd be interesting. We had a contractor on this discussion to see what they would be expecting, because there's a lot of discretion in the past that has been given to the contractors in terms of what the design ends up looking like, in terms of where the cables are run, where the pipes are put. A lot of discretion that can be had by the contractor. It doesn't need to be driven by a design. Versus where we're going, we are driving to a very tight design, which everything is orderly, and that's how it's going to be built, and that's how it's going to operate, which is great. There's a lot of advantages to that, but I don't think the advantages in the design are as great as the advantages in having that information after, having that digital information when the building is operating. Then you can start seeing those things that you've talked about in terms of efficiencies, in terms of profitability and the returns, which we don't typically capture. Ideas like digital twins, which there's a lot of research in terms of how a digital twin will allow for us to really understand the expected performance versus the actual performance of a building, or of multiple buildings, or even of a city, at one point. So I think the level of data that we are using for our designs, very, very important, I think, as part of the design process to improve the efficiency of the contractor, but 10 times more important after that building is open, or after that road is operating, to allow us to capture that information. There's a lot of challenges in terms of the complexities, but you said the computing processors and those things are really driving the capabilities that we have now. Software is becoming a much more intuitive, easy to use. The engineers that are coming out of school now are particularly amazing when it comes to digital interfacing and use of data. They're able to navigate in a 3D space much easier, much more naturally, which is important from a design perspective, just understanding how to operate in that space. So I think we are seeing some great innovation in terms of that. But again, we have a very steep mountain to climb to get to where other industries are.
The issue there is not the technology, is it? So as you say, the tech exists, and if it doesn't, it very quickly exists, and it can be made to fit together. The interoperability, there's still issues around that, but the technology is not the challenge. I think the challenge is the attitudes and behaviors and around the tech, if you're not careful. So just because you've required a BIM model doesn't mean that designers and contractors and the whole team are going to share data. It doesn't mean that you're actually going to maintain one single source of the truth. You still see examples where people are reluctant to hand over that model, partly else, for fear of being held to account for the accuracy of it, as if that was a problem, as if. But issues like liability and so on sort of get in the way, and it brings us to this subject of trust. Do I trust you to use the information I give you for its purpose, and not to sort of rip it off and use it on your next project without my approval or without my involvement or something? Do you trust me that it's accurate? or are you going to go remeasure everything or redraw it anyway? And when it comes to commercial data, are we going to maintain two different sets of records about the project? Because I've got this idea that I could hit you with some claims later on. So I'm going to keep all my records carefully about where the claim opportunity is, but I'm going to give you a separate set of information which shows that everything is going swimmingly well for the time being. And for me, trust is say what you're going to do and then do what you said you were going to do and repeat and show that to your colleagues, to client, whoever we're talking about the relationship being a trusting one with. And if you don't have longer term relationships, trust is therefore hard to develop because you've got to get around that loop of, look, I said I would do this and I've done it, haven't I? So you sort of need to show people, evidence people that you are trustworthy. It's fantastic how the industry is embracing digital. It really is in every respect. But if we just talk about this BIM thing, that it's being held back by the lack of integration of the process. Now, is this chicken or is this egg? Can BIM drive a more integrated process? And if you like, force an integration, force a level of data sharing and collaboration between the parties. Well, wow, I don't know many people who will allow a machine or a set of processes to force their behaviors. I think the behaviors have to, sort of the attitudes have to be right first. So you're going to have to encourage more soft skills or more understanding of what makes good collaboration. More skills like, how do you understand someone else's motivation? How good's your EQ? How good's your levels of empathy? Can you put yourself in other people's shoes and understand where they're coming from, and therefore how it is that they want the information from you, what it is that they would want to hear from you, what it is they need from you, I should say. There are fantastic examples of this. Don't get me wrong, but everything from the way we bring people into the industry to the way we educate people to the early experiences we give people, too often seems to knock all that out of them and leave people as quite hard-nosed alpha male, and they are male too often, alpha male types, instead of us rewarding and encouraging and fostering more collaborative behaviors.
I would agree on some of the engineer stereotypes that I'm
not addressing my comments at engineers. I know we're talking to WSP. No. I'm not addressing my comments at engineers. I'm talking very generically, I assure you.
We are seeing a change in that. And I think software and digital does have a big part to play in it because we are taking away the necessity for some of those real hard skills. That when you're in university and you're taking an advanced calculus class, you lose the opportunity to take a diversity class. You lose that opportunity to take a communications class or a speech, writing class. You lose some of those opportunities versus others that are in those type of programs. So now I think the hard maths, while important to build that foundation from an engineering perspective, I'm seeing a different group of people that are coming out of universities now, much more well-versed in kind of the global mindset, much more open to diversity, much more willing to work in new groups, throw them into a room with 10 people they've never met before, and 15 minutes later, they're working well together. So we are seeing some of that, which is being driven by, there's a lower reliance on some of that, the hard engineering skills, that we were drawing a perfect straight line and drawing a perfect, R60 curve, those kind of things. We don't have to do that anymore.
And you make it, that is a really great point. I mean, Generation Y, Generation Z have different motivations and different sort of fundamental behaviors. The key then for our industry, and I've worked a lot with young generation groups over the last 25 years, encouraging, fostering, letting them come through. The key is for the industry to bring those skills and bring those people through faster than perhaps we have done in the past, to encourage and reward those behaviors and demonstrate that we value them and not sort of knock it out of them or not hold them back from coming into positions of influence and eventually leadership. And I simply don't know how good our firms are or are going to be in fostering that sort of talent. I'm sure we're learning. I'm sure we're getting better at it because our knowledge and our expertise in people development grows all the time. But is it going to be, fast enough?
True. Is it going to be fast enough? Because there are, from our perspective, we're a very large firm. We have a lot of engineers, and we bring in a lot of good people every year. But is there a risk that a small group of very, very talented engineers, scientists, whoever, are going to come up with a disruptive technology that just makes this no longer a necessity? So they solve the engineering problem, which is pretty easy to solve, and they bring those soft skills to the marketplace. I did a talk maybe in 2019 around what I think the engineer of the future is going to look like, and we've slowly divided engineers and architects and designers. So you got your science and maths, and you've got your artistic, creative sides, and they've kind of diverged over the last 25, 30 years. Engineering used to lead architecture back in the day. Now it's kind of architecture is leading the engineering. I think we are going to have a convergence of those, though, where we're not going to necessarily need to have a divide between the engineer and the architect. They can be one and the same. Part of the design process with the new software and tools will allow for that creative, soft skills, artistic side and the engineering to almost be delivered hand in hand, which is a great opportunity for people that are, I know hundreds of engineers that are extremely creative people, but they're now in a role where they're supporting architecture. So to have that opportunity to get into influencing architecture from an engineering perspective and vice versa, I think it's going to be, we're not going to have engineers, we're not going to have architects, we're going to have designers, we're going to have people that are designing.
To broaden your argument there a little bit, I mean, one of the trends that I was very, very enthusiastic to see and worked very hard to encourage, particularly in the UK, was the idea of integration of design, construction and operation, so that the design process, or the integrated design team, if you will, has designers involved in it from the contractors, the specialist contractors, particularly the high risk, the high value packages. So for example, the M&E design would have involved in it for sure the M&E specialist contractor, even potentially one or two of the product suppliers, because increasingly they bring design expertise, even if that is only in terms of a knowledge of performance specification and maintenance regime, which are all part of the design concept. So the early involvement of supply chain and operators in the design process seems to me critical, because, I mean, there is no superhuman, whether we used to call them an architect or whether we used to call them an engineer, who can any longer have all that expertise and understand the performance of every component and every subsystem in such a way that it will deliver an optimum building, an optimum asset over its lifetime. It's a massive integrated team effort.
No, I agree. Because the challenges we face, we think we're standardized in terms of spec, that, okay, a light bulb is a light bulb and it screws into a socket, and a light switch fits into the same vacuum box. We're not. And, maybe on a very, small level, we are standardized. But that goes out the window once you get above, 2-story building and you're into some challenging engineering. So having that intimate knowledge, and back to your point on supply chain, if we could establish a streamlined supply chain, and the developers, engineers, consultants, and some of the suppliers are all part of that, extremely efficient, I think. But it takes away a lot of the challenges that we face, in terms of all the technical challenges and the quality challenges, and replaces a need for trust with just intimate knowledge of each other. That opens up that opportunity for creativity. That opens up an opportunity for uniqueness, because you no longer have to worry about your building span. You no longer have to worry about foundation design. Those are all well established and understood. Now you can focus on, okay, let's make this look cool. Let's make this efficient. Let's make it future ready. Let's make it flexible and adaptable.
I like this idea. That's the second time you sort of introduced the idea of creating space, whether it's in education, whether it's in project environments. You're by taking away the mundane of stuff we don't any longer need to know because we've digitized it or whatever, you're creating space for the clever bit. What I would say is the clever bit, the value, the innovation, the new thinking, which gets squeezed for time as well as for money at the moment.
Talking to engineers about that, they're afraid of some of the innovation that's coming they're afraid of AI, and not from the Terminator side of AI, but afraid that AI is going to replace them. And I have to be a bit optimistic, but I really believe it, because when you look back at the inception of computers into the world, I'm sure all the accountants were very afraid. Oh my gosh, this computer is now going to replace me and my calculations and my slide rules and all the hard work that I've gone through in school to learn accounting. Not the case. We have more accountants, more powerful accounting practices, than ever before, and that opened up an opportunity for them. And the same thing with AI and advanced automation. When that comes really, really hard into the market, we're not going to have less engineers. We may not have engineers, like I said. We may have designers. We're not going to have less. We're going to have more, but they're going to be doing those things, like you said, being creative, collaborating, having real, honest discussions about what is the intent of this project. What do we really want to do? Get down to the root of it, and have discussions about what is this project going to be in 10 years? What is this project going to be in 20 years, 50 years, rather than what's this project going to be on day one, because that's all we need to focus on, is getting this thing built and open.
And they may work for a different type of entity. They may not work for what today we call an engineering firm. They may be working for what today we call a contracting business, or even a manufacturer, for the reasons I've suggested. It depends who becomes the main integrator. Who's the lead integrator of the process? Who's got the ability to create that integrated team and deliver as a one-stop shop on the face of it for the client? Because if we're going to build lots of modular, prefabricated facilities, digitally enabled, so let's say a whole hundreds of school buildings, create that integrated team. Who's got the money and or the business model that best suits the ability to make money out of that approach? And it might not be the engineering firms. It might not be contractors. It might be the manufacturers who've got the biggest capital and the factory and and they can set up a new side of their business, which is the installation, the contracting arm. They can set up a new side of their business, which is the design arm. They can set up a new set of their side of their business, which is the research labs. And the integrated entity, and they'll have an operation and maintenance arm, exactly like Boeing would, or exactly like, to use your example right from the start of the conversation. And so, it is fascinating to think where that disruption might come from. It could come from within our own industry, and it's only one scenario. Of course, it's only one scenario. So I think it's very interesting for the leaders of engineering firms and leaders of contractors leading a manufacturer. What sort of business do you want to be? How do you want to make your money? How do you want to add value in the future? What best suits your values as a business and the potential skills that you will be able to deploy in 10, 20 years' time? And therefore, how do you want your business model to evolve? What do you want to be? Other parts of this sector, and it's absolutely not addressing engineering firms, just to be clear. But I think too many contractors, for example, sit around almost as victims, just waiting for the next tender to arrive and doing whatever their client, whatever the specification tells them to do, bidding whatever the tender documents tell them to bid. And they're sort of the followers. They're not setting out a vision of where they want to be as a company. They're just letting the market take them in whatever direction their clients want to take them. And I think there is scope, particularly for leading firms, particularly those with strong leadership and strong values, to at least have a sense of what you want that vision to be. I recognize market forces can get in the way. Of course they can. You've still got to survive. You got to live. You can't just set up a new business model and then sit and wait and hope some clients come to find you. There's a lot involved in that change process, but at least have that running in parallel with the day-to-day business working under the current regime. Have a sense of where one ideally would want to get to, and therefore do put in place some of the things that would allow you to get to that vision.
Yeah, no, I agree, because we have the manufacturers, so the guys that are making the bits and bobs that are out there trying to innovate. I want the best digital screen, or they're trying to develop the best concrete aggregate. High performance concretes. They're developing new steel components, yada yada yada, all the way up through completely disconnected from the end user. They're using that contractor middleman, as and the engineers, probably as well to do that translation. But they have no knowledge of those tools. And the contractor, again, isn't necessarily keen on the innovation that supplier is bringing if it's not a value proposition.
No, but it would have to be a value proposition for their current client or their next client, you see it. And so that's where the business model needs to change. And if we talk about how that might happen, one of the most powerful drivers for change in the sector is client leadership. From the point of view of the customer, for anything, you get what you buy. So if you want to buy something different, you need to set out to buy something different. So what you're seeing, you mentioned the Far East and offsite manufacture, modularization, prefabrication, and so on and so forth. And many sectors of the world, a big trend in the UK as well, and North America. The clients deciding that this bespoke one-off approach is not right for their types of need. So if you want to see offsite production as the mode of delivery for your program, go out and buy offsite production, because it's not going to happen unless you specify it. And clients and you talk about digital, one of the things that speeded up the uptake of digital, I suggest, because I think the supply side could have used digital and still can implement all sorts of aspects of digital and robotics and so on. They don't need to wait to be told by their clients, but it seems like they did have to be told about BIM to really take it seriously. And a number of clients who said, as you pointed out, we want digital because we want the as-built data for our maintenance regime, for our facilities management, and so on and so forth. Therefore, at the start, we are going to specify the use of BIM because that is the best way for us to get the digital data for operation. Client made it happen. And in so many ways, that's how you have to break through this inertia, is how can you educate clients? How many educated clients are there out there? How can the supply side help clients better understand their role in this and their opportunity in this?
That's very true. I mean, the client, the end developer, the party with the checkbook is driving a lot of our behaviors versus us challenging the way that we've done things, coming up with new ideas, taking some risk. There is risk in the industry pushing towards that, but with any risk, and this is the kind of security risk side of me, with any risk, there's a massive amount of opportunity, I think, to create. So it's something that we need to be better at. We need to be pushing that innovation into our projects. Pushing the change into our projects without being led by the clients, because with all of our understanding of our clients, we don't have 100% empathy yet. We're not there at that point where we're sitting hand in hand with them at the decision-making table. So we need to get closer on that front, but also to build that trust, we need to have those opportunities to show them that it works. And in an environment that's highly regulated, as our industry is, there's a third party we have to convince. So if we want to do something new and different, if I want to use a different software to model a structure that gives me better efficiency, probably lowers the overall safety factor within things. There's a very high safety factor in structures, but anytime you move that lower, you increase the value that you provide. And interestingly, I was watching a video about NASA, and you would think that NASA and the space shuttles and whatnot operate with an extremely wide safety factor, 10 times safety factor. Not the case. They're operating a very fine line of quite a low safety factor in those type of industries. So, I'm not saying push things to be unsafe, but I'm saying pushing things to be more efficient through the use of technology. But that requires a lot of trust. Changing materials to, like I said, high performance concrete, again, takes more trust in who's reviewing those structural designs to sign off on it, from the authority's perspective, because there is a lot of accountability that's put on those individuals when they sign off on a structure that their name is on that permit. So the level of trust kind of escalates up through into the client. So we need to try to show that these things work, and it does exist. When you go and you buy an M8 bolt, that's an M8 bolt. You trust that the supplier has provided you with an M8 bolt, and it's going to meet spec and whatnot. We have to continue to push that level of trust into the innovative space where we're designing things that are new and unique and pushing the boundaries with some of these new technologies that are available to us, the new materials, the new processes, the new ways of thinking. You mentioned lean, which, if you break lean down, it's pretty intuitive, from a, psychological perspective. It should be natural way we do things, but it's not, So we have to create this process, to remind ourselves on how to do things efficiently, which is quite interesting that we let things, take over. All the pressures that we have, all the pressures that our clients have, do tend to take over and drive us away from that process, which then restricts our capability to be creative, restricts our capability to be innovative in the industry. So it's interesting that it does come back to, again, not the hard skills, not the tech, it comes back to the people.
Absolutely. I mean, the lesson, one of the strongest lessons, one of the most impressive things that you guys achieved, WSP achieved in implementing lean in the Middle East, which I saw on site, was that, to really make it work, you have to get, as I've already said in another context, you need to bring the contractors and even the manufacturers together into a design discussion because they will have as many ideas about how to improve the process, to improve the program, to improve the cost, as the project manager may or the designer might. And, that is incredibly culturally challenging in that part of the world because designers and contractors and manufacturers are not used to being treated as equals and treating each other as equals, So, but when it happened, wow, it was impressive. And wow, they made some big impacts in terms of impact on program and consequently on cost and price. But it took effort. It took leadership, including it took the client. At the very least, it took the client to allow it to happen. So the client can be proactive and say, I want this to happen, or it needs to be persuaded to trust in the process, to take the advice of WSP and say, yeah, we will allow that to happen because we are persuaded that this is potentially a good idea. And the other aspect of innovation in that sense, with anything new comes risk, but you can de-risk that that process through working closer with academics, with research partners. There's a whole bunch of evidence and data can be collected in that way. And then through, I really am surprised that we don't put more emphasis on pilot projects or demonstration projects, ideally with the active engagement of the client. Let's ring fence this project, accept that it could go wrong, but we are going to try something new and we are going to do it scientifically to see what we learn, what works, what we can improve, make a decision on whether this is commercially viable and whether it's something we want to then put into full practice. And the ability to run pilot demonstration projects is not something that happens very often, but I think is something which ought perhaps to be developed more strongly, because you've mentioned or you've alluded to one or two of the big challenges that still remain around materials, advanced materials. What are we going to do about concrete? What are we going to do about steel? These are heavily carbon intensive materials. How are we just going to rely on the manufacturing sector to decarbonize their processes and to make their all their processes environmentally sound, or are we going to change materials? And if so, how are we going to work with the manufacturing sector to make that happen? And when someone comes along with a new additive for concrete, as you mentioned, How are we going to trial that for the first time?
No, it comes back to trust.
It does. And processes for ring fencing and managing that risk process, the risk in that process.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think, we're very fortunate, and you've had a lot of experience in the Middle East, and majority of my career has been in this region. We have had those opportunities for those pilots, those firsts, those, amazing, wow factor type things, which we continue to do. But it is on a larger scale, and it is using, just your traditional, standard construction methodologies. So yeah, it's a great question on why we don't do a lot more of these pilots, these tests, and these one-off designs. But we are seeing that. We are seeing stuff like 3D printed buildings in the Middle East, which as a 3D printing nerd, if people know me, we are 3D printing buildings. We have been 3D printing buildings for 100 years. It's additive construction. We're pouring into a mold. Only change is we're not going to be using molds potentially in the future. And again, going to your offsite production, we won't be necessarily doing it on site. Talking about the Middle East being, a great place for innovation, but we're seeing it around the world. We're seeing it in Canada. We're seeing it in the Nordics. We're seeing things like timber frame construction. Which is with the CLT, the laminate timber construction, quite amazing. Coming from the Middle East, it would be a challenge, but I think that would be a remarkable thing to see, a building constructed here where traditionally everything is concrete and steel, to seeing a material that's that different, that so far out there that we're not building it taller, we're not building it flashier, but we're building it with something that is just traditionally not been done here. Timber frame structures are rare in the region. Everything is concrete and steel. My house is all concrete block. Every house I lived in prior to coming to the Middle East was timber framed. So it'll be interesting to see some of those just diversifying the methodologies that we're using, and vice versa. There's other regions that could probably lean on some of the things we've done here in the Middle East for their region. So. But coming back on it, it's interesting how we're talking about innovation, we're talking about change, and really it does come back to people, our mindset, our way of communicating, and how we work together as a team that really makes that successful. It's not the technology. You said it. Technology is here. It's there. That's not what's limiting us. We're the limiting factor, in this conversation, and it's a great aspiration to have that we don't have to worry about the technology that is coming. It's working with people to develop those skills that aren't traditionally aligned to construction and engineering.
I mean, I wonder, to what extent the global pandemic, COVID-19, is going to be a catalyst here for improvement. This pandemic has hit everybody around the world in so many ways. What will we learn, and what will we proactively decide we want to see done differently? Or will we just revert to the old ways because it's kind of easy? That's the path of least resistance. Just carry on doing what we were doing before. See how much of the old ways we can reinstate. Aren't we surely going to need a very different type of built environment? If social distancing is necessary, does that mean we have to space out our buildings, wider corridors, that type of implication? Does it mean that certain types of asset are going to disappear from the scene? Are we going to need less offices, less office space? We're already seeing less retail. Will that trend continue and more online shopping? And therefore you totally change the potential nature of city centres. But I wonder to what extent we can use that the impact to innovate in our process.
No, I agree, and we were aware of changes happening. Before the COVID had hit, we were aware of but we were maybe wrong in taking into COVID into consideration. We were looking towards more urbanization. We were looking towards more densely populated areas, the mega cities and looking at challenging problems around mobility and transport, the psychological aspects of living in a city, and growing up in a tower versus living in a house in a smaller community. Those were the challenges that we were preparing to face. And from WSP's perspective, we were looking at something called Future Ready in terms of how do we modify the environment or how do we design things that are flexible to allow for that change to happen, because we knew retail was the environment around retail was changing. We've got a lot of malls, a lot of retail, a lot of parking, and if there's changes in vehicle automation, if there's changes in the number of people that do go to the retail spaces for shopping, well, we're not going to just simply let the building sit there unused. What do we turn it into? Or how do we design it in the first place so it can be turned into a school or a hospital or a sports facility, those kind of things. So, but maybe COVID's going to make this take a bit of a left-hand turn towards less urbanization, towards more sparsely populated areas, to more kind of rural communities, which is completely contrary to what we thought it was going to be 2 years ago. Now, I don't know. I'd be interested to know, in your research of how we changed after the global economic crisis, did we change?
I would say no. I mean, the title of our report at the time was Never Waste a Good Crisis. Well, I would say, and I think corporately we did say we did waste a good crisis. Certainly in terms of impact and take-up of issues like integrated supply chains, collaborative working. I think one thing we did see around the world is you've got far higher, the industry has changed, particularly, for example, around safety and health and well-being. So we were in a much better position come the COVID impact in terms of management of health of our workers because of the changes that have happened in safety management over the last 20 years. And that, in part, a client-driven revolution, in part, a government regulation-driven revolution, but a lot of it industry-led, industry's leadership saying this is not good enough. Everybody has a right to come to work and go home and be healthy and safe. And that's a massive change that I saw in most parts of the world. And we didn't go back on that during the crisis, during the recession. That was not a set of standards that were suddenly thrown away and say, we can't afford that. We maintained that. So I think you can see examples where we're moving towards trends like net zero in terms of environmental impacts. And we're ratcheting up the standards to which we build and operate built facilities in a way which look irreversible to me, even without the legislation that's inevitably coming, and even without the decarbonisation of electricity grids, which is sort of helping us because the input of energy has less carbon in it. But we just are building more responsibly, designing and building and operating more responsibly, and that looks like a one-way direction to me. But digital, is a direction of travel which is all positive in terms of supporting these changes. And as you mentioned, the input of the next generation of young talent, their values, their drivers, all take us in that direction. So maybe you're seeing some stars aligning. Maybe what's different this time. That means we won't waste this opportunity, this crisis. Maybe there are just more stars aligned. And more experience of having wasted previous opportunities, and more people around who have said enough is enough. We really need to try and work a different way. Some of the most influential clients in the world, it seems to me, are people who've worked on the supply side, whether as contractors, whether as engineering consultants, and then have then become a client. So sort of poacher turned gamekeeper. They know the industry well, they understand there is a better way, and they come into the client role determined to support that better way, which is collaboration founded on trust.
Yeah. No, that's certainly something that I'm going to take away from this in terms of just trying to find better ways to introduce those innovations to our clients, but at a conversational level. Not on a technical level.
Absolutely. Offline, as it were. Coffee, not in the context of a tender or of a delivery of a project, but offline, longer term.
just have those real open conversations around, what can we do if we tried something different? What would it look like? What type of pressures would that put on them, or vice versa on us? And how can we, challenge the status quo from the industry in trying something different, and potentially without anybody else really knowing about it. There's a lot of things that we can do just through that understanding, that relationship, to improve the end product, and nobody is more aware along that process. But it does start with that trust and that conversation to say, we're not going to just do something box standard. We're going to do something a bit different. We're going to try some new things. There are risks around it. Here's our plan for managing that risk. We both share that risk. We're the engineers, and we're going to be designing it, and you're the ones that are going to be operating it in the future. Let's see how it goes. And the next time we work together, and that's that supply chain. The next time we work together, we'll take that experience. We'll take the things that we've learned, the good and the bad, and we'll apply it again. We're not going to simply put that in a drawer and forget about it. So it's something that we need to do more, rather than focusing on the hard engineering technical side of what we do, and focusing more on those conversations that allow for the ease of those things to happen. Otherwise, somebody's going to come up with a solution, a technical solution that is so compelling from a value perspective that those conversations no longer have to exist.
And you raised two thoughts with me, and I probably haven't the time to sort of develop both of them. One is I'd love for clients and industry to be able to have a more mature conversation about profit. It's a dirty word too often, and the industry can be embarrassed to talk to the client about profitability, to declare what its profit levels are, let alone to say, well, actually we want to make more money because of our shareholders, or because we want to invest in research or improve technology. That conversation doesn't happen enough for me, and clients aren't mature enough either to have that conversation. To sort of, we want to reduce profit, don't we? No. I mean, personally, I want to work with people who are making money, because then they're not going to worry about how to make more money. They're going to worry about delivering me a good job, because the profit's been taken care of. And I want them to make more money if they do a better job, and I want them to make less money if they do a worse job. And the commercial arrangements don't always reflect that. But that perhaps isn't the most interesting sort of dimension of what you said. But maybe we've run out of time.
No, I think we're okay to chat a bit more. But that what you said about profit. I know my clients want to make profit.
Yes.
Now and in the future, and they know that I want to make profit now and in the future. That's not a a game changer there, but there is a lack of empathy in that conversation. It's a pure transactional conversation around profits, rather than a how do we succeed together.
Yeah.
What do you need from me to be successful?
Absolutely.
To make money.
Yeah.
And then this is what I need to provide to you, and this is the process that is most efficient for me in delivering those things to you.
And now,
how do we streamline?
Now you're describing for me true collaboration, and you are certainly describing the type of conversation that takes place all the time in aerospace and automotive.
What factory do I need to produce the components for your next airplane?
Yes.
That's the conversation.
What level of deal flow to make that investment worthwhile? What level of supply I need to produce in order to be able to afford the investment in the factory. All sorts of conversations that take place that we don't, are predicated on trust, and they're predicated on the fact that we're looking for a long-term relationship here, and therefore, how can I help you as client make more money? Be more successful in your core purpose, whether that's making money, whether it's delivering better healthcare, whatever that is, and along the way, how can I make more money by adding more value? Very, very strong.
So yeah, it all comes back to that personal collaborative connection, with anybody, and I think it's just the next evolution. I think as technology comes into the space, as innovation continues to reduce the mundane, reduce the boring and the repetitive in what we do, because there's a lot of it in engineering and construction. There is the same thing, putting up gypsum board in a room, quite boring and repetitive work, to replace that with a process, and there is robotic, processes that are coming, will only open up an opportunity for somebody else to be doing the detailed finish work, the detailed carpentry, which you can't do. That's something that, needs a human touch. And we'll have more of that in the future. The same thing with engineering. We are going to be moving towards the engineering is solved, and now we have that human touch involved in how does it look, how does it feel, how does your building feel, Mr. Client, Miss Client, how does this going to make your customers feel, especially from a healthcare perspective, interestingly, hospitals used to look like hospitals. Now hospitals look like hotels, or they're starting to. This is the next. Because precisely that we've solved all the other issues around where to put things within a hospital. All those are solved. Now we know how we've knocked that out of the ballpark. Where to put departments? Where's the flow between radiology and whatever? Now we're focused on the people, the experience, and we're only going to get there, more and more.
Well, there's a lot of scientific evidence. I remember the work of the Pebble Initiative, academic-led research into hospitals in the United States, showing that single rooms, carpeted, with a view of nature, with certain color scheme. Some of those issues to a technical engineer would sound counterproductive, but those are all factors which aid recovery of the patient, and that is what it's all about. And bearing in mind that's a private sector healthcare model as well. So the repeat business that comes from that great patient experience is important to the hospital. But even without that, the healthcare outcomes are far better with that higher quality of accommodation for the patient. But how would you know that unless you had got the feedback from the operators and the facilities management back into the design and construction process? And my sort of other thought in what you said earlier was, in terms of what could WSP take away from this conversation, as well as going to talk to clients and potential future clients and understanding their aspirations and just chewing the cud really over what they think might be happening in the future, it's worth going back to old buildings that you worked on and, get over the fact that you might be worried about some sort of liability exposure, that you might uncover something that's gone wrong. Get over that. Go and look at something you worked on 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Does it work? What is the lessons learned today about a design that you previously worked on? Do you actually know how your buildings are performing? Do they deliver the value, the business case that the original client had in mind when they appointed you as engineers or designers? And go and evaluate it. And you can do it very informally. Just ask for a chat, ask for a coffee, and just wander around the building and see, are the occupants using it in the way in which you thought they would? And I bet they're not, by the way, because obviously life has moved on. Does it look like it physically performs like you expected? Get some data if you can. But any sort of anecdotal, qualitative feedback like that seems to me closes the feedback loop in a way which automotive and aerospace would do, especially aerospace, because they have the contracts for the engine maintenance, so they know how their engines perform, so that it can improve them. We don't tend to have that business model, except in PPP, which in some cases may be an improved model for the future, but it has other challenges. But at least get that anecdotal feedback and go and talk to some of the old clients and understand whether the facilities work or not. And of course, of course you want to know how the relationship was. Did they enjoy working with WSP? But some years on, actually, does the building work?
No, that's a great challenge to throw at us, and I'll definitely talk to my and not just us, the industry. That's something that But
It applies to contractors as well, especially as M&E contractor. Go and find out if the thing you designed and installed 10 years on actually had a 10-year lifetime or 15 year, whatever you thought it was going to be. Has it worked? Manufacturers will tend to know this because they've provided the guarantees, or they may have the maintenance contracts. So they will have some of this data, but the installers and the designers often don't. And I think it's an important gap in knowledge that would help future performance.
It's true, but we are seeing a diversification of our industry. So we were engineering consultancy, and now we're adding on more advisory services, which and those coming across the board will open up opportunities for us to continue to maintain that relationship, maintain that visibility of our products, into the future.
Yeah, and Dave, seems to me that's brought us to a very nice, conclusion as far as where we are with trust and innovation. It is all about people, and future generations are coming into an incredibly exciting industry. My closing message would be: anybody working in construction in the built environment is literally building the world and literally having the biggest impact on saving the planet. If it's climate change and environmental sustainability that you worry about when you get out of bed, there's no better industry to work in.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. It's a great kind of closing thought, and I agree. It's going to be just from my side to anybody that is interested in our industry from a construction and designing industry, is that you don't have to be an engineer to get involved in this. That what we're doing. You can have skills, and those could be technical skills, or those could be people skills that will be valuable to the future of these industries of construction and buildings and making places, because as we've discussed, it's not going to be the technology, it's going to be the people. I'm not an engineer, so but I come from a very weird background we won't get into on this conversation, but I've found a great place that fits me perfectly within this industry, and there's a great opportunity for non-traditional engineers, and I've got air quotes, to get involved, and it's more and more accepted. As we evolve, we're going to have less degreed hard engineers involved in some pretty serious engineering, because we'll have the trust in the technology, we'll have the trust in the processes, and as will our clients, that they won't need to see a piece of paper in front of them from an engineer. They will see something that's been designed and built and operating for them in front of their eyes. So it's again getting back to that trust aspect. So with that, I think thank you very much for your time. It's been very, very interesting. I think the conversation has gone completely away from where we thought it would go, and I think for the right reasons, that we've really understood the root of what we're talking about here, and really look forward to have an opportunity to continue the discussion and look for opportunities for us to work together in the future.
Well, thanks, Dave. I really, really enjoyed it as well, and I look forward to continuing to talk. Thanks a lot.